Hi guys, and welcome to episode 22 of SEO Tales, where I'm joined by Mr. Itamar Blower and myself, as always. Again, I don't know why we keep doing these introductions. If you're watching the show after show after show, or maybe watching two or three at the same time, I do apologise. We don't change. But yeah, so thanks for joining us for episode 22. We're getting on a bit in this. And we're going to jump into the craziest link building strategies this week. And I think, link building is a topic we have covered before. I think we covered PBNs, and I think we've just covered generic link building. But people are always, one of the most common things, whether you're at a conference or whether you're at a webinar, link building is still a hot topic in this industry. Let's not kid ourselves. And people do a lot of weird and wonderful things. But, you don't always have to just do crazy stuff. Again, like anything, and like previous last week's episode of SEO Tales, where we spoke about doing the basic things right, the same process applies when it comes to link building. You can get links from directories, local, places, and all that kind of stuff. And, general, websites out there that allow that type of thing to happen. And, that is where Itamar is going to start. Itamar, you do a lot of basic fundamentals. Now, we will go into some of the crazy stuff. I've got, some stories and stuff like that. But again, when it comes to link building, we don't have to dive in for the crazy stuff right from the get-go. You've got to get a starting point. You've got to get a nice solid base and a nice foundation, and maybe use the crazy stuff as the icing on top. So I want to reiterate that from the start. I'm not saying go all out and do all sorts of crazy stuff right from the get-go. Do it as quickly and as cleanly as you possibly can, and maybe add a wee crazy thing here or there, because everyone does. It's like those healthy guys in the gym. Not that I'm one of these, but do they ever have a little can of Coke? Do they ever put any sugar in their body? Of course they do. And it's the same with SEO. We've got to bend the rules a little bit here and there. But, that's where we start. And Itamar, you are going to play the good cop this week and give us some basic tips on what you do when you start a campaign and you start to get some links. So tell us a bit of some of the basic tricks and the easy quick wins you can get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in terms of quick wins, I think you need to first look at the content you have. And, that's a mistake that a lot of people say, is they're like, well, I need to build links. But then I'll ask them, where are you going to build these links for? What's the purpose behind it? Do you know what kind of site would want to link to your content? And I think you got to really kind of take it back, take a step back and think about the content that you already have, and think, how am I able to get somebody to think that this piece of content's good enough so that they might link to it? And, in terms of stuff that I've done, even for, I've got a guide on brand management, for instance. And I thought, this blog content is something that is valuable for people. So if it's valuable for people, then why should I not be able to build links for it in fairly simple ways? So, I just found a website that they listed some resources. So it was a kind of resource page where somebody was just finding these brand management guides or things to do with brand management, and they just put them on there. And, mind you, the last time they had something updated on there was, I think, 2 years ago, something like that. So, I just sent outreach, just emailed them. And I said, look, I've got this piece of content. I see what you've got there on your page. It's all good stuff. Consider checking out my guide to see if it's worthy of being added to your list. And within about a day, the guy was like, sure, no problem, just added it. And I was like, okay, cool. So, that took minimal effort on my part. And it was also so simple for them to do it. And because they genuinely enjoyed my content, that they thought, this is really good, I'm going to add it in there. And I think that's why, we're going to get into some of the stuff, Craig, that you've done, which is absolute insanity in terms of, what you can do to build links. But, I think sometimes you just really need to think about the linkable assets that you have and think, how am I going to be able to build links to this content? If you don't have the content, you should have content that's linkable, right? I think no matter what industry you're in, even if you're a plumber, even if you're a builder, you're trying to build links, you should be able to create content that is interesting for people in that niche, and so people will actually link to it. So I think let's start off with that and just say, have linkable assets on your site, and you'll find link building much easier, I suppose.
Right, so what I'm going to ask you is, just for the dummies out there, what is a linkable asset? Give us an example of what you would have in a plumber's website that people would want to link to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically a linkable asset would be a piece of content or an asset on your website that would be useful for other people to link to. So say, for example, you're a plumber. You might have on your website, you might have a blog page, and you might have a blog post about some kind of interesting study or statistics, or even information about the best types of tools, plumbing tools or things like that, where you kind of demonstrate, you've got comparisons of different tools. You've maybe got videos there demonstrating for people who are interested in plumbing how to use them or which ones they should pick. That would be a linkable asset, because that's something that people will find valuable in terms of that kind of industry. And then you can reach out to different websites that are related to plumbing, because there must be, right? Any kind of industry ever will have a bunch of websites that write content about them. And I think especially for niches where they do get more competitive, that's where you need to be a bit more creative, because the more competition there is, the chances are that somebody would have already done something similar to what you want to do. So in terms of linkable assets, you can just think of what you do in your niche. Think of something that would interest you or something that you would like to find out more about. And oftentimes you can just write it based on that. And obviously, if you need help from somebody who's a really good writer to write it for you, you can do that. But you just need to have these assets that are valuable to you, and then you can start building links much quicker.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right in what you say. And, the more competitive you have to become, or the more competitive the niche, the more creative you have to become. And I'll give you an example of how this wasn't my trick, by the way. This is just a trick, so I'm not going to claim credit for this one. But it's how my devious mind works, and it's why it always sticks in my brain, and why I love SEO. So there was a local letting agent in Glasgow, just doing the run-of-the-mill, letting out houses and all that stuff. And as Itamar says, like, there's some things you can write, where's the best properties, best furniture for properties, whatever. But, sometimes that can prove difficult, in my opinion. It can work, but it can prove difficult. So an example of a creative story is someone done a bit of PR, or whatever you want to call it, and they come up with this cock and bull story. Now, what I want to say here is, life is a game. Everything doesn't have to be true and squeaky clean. You can make shit up, to get links. Now, I'm not saying create lies, but in this example, someone done a bit of creative journalism, if you like, and said that they went to rent a property, and the property was like £450 a month for for this house. And when the guy turned up, it was only the bathtub that was available to rent. So it was a kind of cock and bull story, but it actually made the paper, and it actually went viral. So like 40 other papers picked that up. So the guy said, like, this is a bloody disgrace. I went to view this property. I've been staying in a hostel or something like that, and I went to get this property, and it was only the bathtub that was available. Now, there's a bit of humour behind that. It was a cock and bull story. It was just nonsense. But, the papers print that stuff. The paper were given links for that stuff. And that's where it comes to, being creative. I'm not saying go out there and tell lies or anything like that. But, think about what we're reading in the world. It's all bullshit. It's, everything in the press is all lies. Well, I'm not saying everything. A lot of the stuff has been bent to manipulate your head. And obviously, I'm not going to get into politics or any of that crazy stuff. But if you believe everything you read in the paper, you are insane. Now, that is where, if politicians can do it, if sales companies can do it, or whatever, bending the press to suit themselves, then SEOs can bend stories to suit themselves as well and get links. There's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing wrong with it. As long as you're not harming anyone, bullying anyone or doing anything that's going to harm anyone's business, then I see absolutely nothing wrong with a bit of creative journalism. So that's an example of, if I was in the plumbing niche, Itamar would try and be squeaky clean and put out some content, linkable assets. I would probably just go in 2 foot first and come up with some cock and bull story, about plumbing. And who's going to win? Who knows? It just depends on how good the cock and bull story is. So that's one little trick, but there's obviously a lot of other tricks. But going back to the squeaky clean stuff, Itamar, so I do it my way, you do it your way. We get 20 links each. So we've covered the bases. We've got some citations. But, I've got some citations. I've got some PR stuff. You've got some, linkable assets there that people are linking to. What's next? What's your next step?
Well, I think the next step is you just got to look to see how that's affecting your site, right? So, in terms of link building, you can say, oh, we should always build links, but I don't think people kind of audit the links that they have enough in terms of you look at the links you've got, you take a look at, do these links drive traffic? Do these domains that are linking to you have organic traffic? Does the page that your link is on, does that have traffic? Are you getting more traffic from that link to your site? Because a lot of times that will be driving you business. So, if you get traffic from a link that you've got, that can drive you leads, and that's really, really valuable for a business. But, in terms of what's next, I mean, link building's a thing that, does it really stop? You never stop putting out content. You never really stop trying to get links. And I think in terms of the kind of good cop, bad cop, the difference probably is between, in terms of what I'd be doing and the story that you just had is, with my one, if it's a linkable asset and it gets updated and it's still great and you talk about evergreen content, this, that, and the other, that can continue to get links over time without me really doing anything. And you got to sometimes think about it in terms of time investment, because, say, for example, you do put in a lot of time, say if it's like a PR thing, creative journalism, whatever you want to call it. And, you take the time to get up this story, to talk to the press, they pick it up, and that's great. And then your work is basically done from there. And, you might get some really good links because obviously newspapers, these are authoritative sites. Most of the time they have a lot of traffic. So, that's all well and good. But then you think, after 3 months, that story is dead, probably even after a couple of days, right? So you think you might be capped in that sense. And then what that might force you to do is maybe think of, even more creative stories and things like that. So I think it's, in terms of risk reward and then the effort as well that you'd need, I think, these linkable assets that you put in a lot of effort to build them up. And then they kind of, it's kind of like a cash cow over time. If you're able to get, some links for it, a lot of traffic over time, you're ranking really well for these asset pieces, you're getting leads. But, in terms of what you do next, I think it's just always, the kind of thing where it's like, well, more content, more links. But, that's not crazy. So I'll be interested, Craig, to hear another kind of crazy strategy for link building that you've done before, where you've got some really big wins.
So again, I'm going to talk a bit about PR. This is a crazy one, and I think I've shared it on a number of occasions. I'm going to put a disclaimer out there. Be careful in how you use this trick, because I'm just giving a suggestion of what people can do. I'm not saying you should do it. But the image trick that I've spoken about on several occasions, a lot of press out there. If you Google whatever newspaper and then write copyright unknown, normally you'll see an image on that page, page where it says copyright unknown underneath it. Now, in any press article, if they use your image, they would normally credit you. So if they took an image from Itamar, they would normally say copyright Itamar Blower, you know, and potentially give him a link. If they just lifted it off his website, that's what they do. But obviously sometimes the newspaper use images that they don't know. They're just lifting them off the internet, and it says copyright unknown to cover their own backsides. And a trick that's worked well over recent years, and I've spoken about on many occasions at different conferences, was the ability to just reach out to the editor of that newspaper, whether you find them on LinkedIn or you know, whatever. Use your creative mind to do that. Reach out and say, hey there, you've used my image. Don't want to cause any trouble, but it'd be nice if you stuck a little image credit in there. 9 out of 10 times, that editor is just someone new in the building who hasn't a clue what you're trying to achieve, doesn't really understand the value of a link or what it is, and they simply do it. Now, in the past, I've obviously spoken about, you know, impersonating a lawyer, you know, and stuff like that. That's not something I would condone you do, you know, impersonating a lawyer or telling lies when you're doing that outreach. And I don't think you have to go that far with it. I think, you know, if you do just do outreach and say, hey man, you're using my image, blah, 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 blah. If the person's foolish enough to do it, which 9 times out of 10 they are, then you've got a great PR link. And a lot of people like that one. You know, in the past I have said, like, you could say, I'm a lawyer, blah, 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 blah. It's illegal to impersonate a lawyer. So be careful in any lies that you do. Also be careful who you do it to. If you do this trick to someone who actually knows what they're doing, they're going to bloody call you out. So be careful on that as well. But it is a trick that I've seen work. I know several people that have used it, and it has worked very well in the past. So that's another little one. But, you know, I think when people ask what is crazy when it comes to link building, it really comes down to who you're talking to. You know, I've spoken about PBNs and stuff in the past, and people are like, oh man, that's dirty, that's crazy, blah, blah. It's not. You know, everyone's been doing PBNs for the last 10 years. You know, 301 redirects, grabbing expired domains, you know, niche edits, tiered link building, all of these kind of things people think are mind-blowing and crazy. They're not. That's what everyone is doing out there in competitive markets. So to touch on what is tiered link building, or some of the more aggressive strategies that typically, you know, you wouldn't tell your client that you're doing, so to speak, would be buying up some guest posts. So you buy a tier of, say, 5 guest posts, and they all point to your client site and whatever page you want them to go to. So that's obviously a tier of links, and that's relatively safe. You've got your kind of generic anchor text or branded anchor text or whatever. Keep it semi-squeaky clean. It's what goes on under that is where the aggression comes. So whether people are doing 301 redirects, whether people are pumping PBNs at it, niche edits, SEO links, Web 2.0s, automated links, all of that kind of stuff, you're then building like 40 links to that guest post, which then has maybe another 50 links going to that, and it's all over the place. And a tiered link building structure is probably the safest way to build links, in my opinion, in this day and age. Now, people out there will say links are not that important anymore. You know, UX is important, or traffic's important, or whatever. Of course, UX is important. Of course, traffic's important. But the main crux of the internet is content and links. And anyone who says it is not doesn't know what they're doing. It's relatively simple and straightforward. Now, that doesn't mean technical doesn't work. That doesn't mean nothing else works. But content and links do move the needle in any market, whether it's a basic market or whether you're operating in a real competitive market. And what level of tiered link building do you need to do comes down to the competition and all of that kind of stuff. But what you always want to do, although we talk about crazy strategies, is safeguard your business. Do not do anything that's crazy enough. Do not, you know, people misinterpret a lot of these tricks, and they'll start, maybe going out there and buying Money Robot or something, for example, and pumping those links direct to their website. I've never condoned that. That's black hat, that's spammy, that will get you banned. So I think out there, to give people, in terms of people that don't do this type of strategy, an idea. It's how you use the tools, it's how you build your tiers, it's how you safeguard your website. There's a way of doing things horrendously wrong that will get you penalized, and there's a way of being able to do it properly, and that is the difference. Now, people say that's black hat, it's white hat, it's whatever. It's just making money. It's how people work in the world. You ask anyone in America, one of the most competitive countries in the world, in any competitive niche, do you do tiered link building? The answer is yes. I don't care who you are, what white hat you're wearing, what agency you work for, how long you think you've been in this industry. If you're not doing tiered link building, you're a liar. And it's as simple as that. You may be paying some schmuck that's telling you something else. They're doing tiered link building. They're doing, all of the stuff, the guest posts, the PBNs, the 301 redirects, the Web 2.0s, the full shooting match. And it doesn't really matter who says what. That is what's happening in the competitive markets. And obviously you can't tell a client that, hey man, I'm going to build some Web 2.0s this week and smash it to your website. The client would have a fit because they've been brainwashed into thinking that black hat SEO is the devil and that every agency out there is doing squeaky clean work and doing all of the kind of right stuff. Now, obviously, as Itamar says, like some of the tricks, like, evergreen content, if you're able to get a great article out there that's going to get links over time, over a 2 or 3 year period, then fine. My argument to that would be, how the fuck do you do that in the roofer plumber niche? It's very, very hard. And, 1 out of 10 will get that, and that is where people then adapt to the other tactics. Now, Itamar's way is 100% right, and he's correct in what he says. Do people do that? Nah. What I would, and it's not to put you in the spot, Itamar, it's to put the general public in the spot, because people say, yeah, of course, Itamar's right, evergreen content, blah, 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 blah. You pick out one piece of evergreen content in the plumbing niche that you know of, and you will struggle, because they're few and far between. So obviously the concept's right, and if you can do that, it's right. But again, it's very hard to reinvent the wheel, and that's why people do diversify their link building strategies and start to do wacky stuff.
I think it's sometimes also down to your capabilities, your team, how creative you are, because people who are more creative are going to have a better time or a much easier time creating that sort of content. And I think as well, you need to think of how the market is, how competitive is your niche, because maybe your niche isn't competitive enough where you need to do that. No. So I think it's like, each case is going to be different, and link building shouldn't be approached in a kind of one size fits all, because it isn't, because you're only going to need to build more links, or maybe do some, more crazy, if we want to call them crazy, tactics, if you're in such a saturated market where loads of people are building these kind of links. And I think that's where it comes to competitive analysis, because you're not going to I'm not going to take 2 clients and do the same thing for them, because they're in 2 different industries. It means that there's different factors at play here. And like you mentioned as well, of course, it's going to be much harder, evergreen content for a plumber. Is it impossible? No way. It's not impossible. You can find ways to do that, but that's why I think it goes down to, your capabilities. How creative is your team? How are you able to execute this type of content? Do you have good connections? I feel like connections is another really important thing, when we're talking about link building, because the people that in your professional network, you can get links from these people if you play your cards right. And I think it's all very situational. It's something that, again, and the way, this is talking about craziest link building strategies, but like you said, there's many different ways to define crazy, because, there's certain things that I do and I think is perfectly normal that somebody might think, oh, that's a bit weird, or that's crazy. Like, for example, if I've got a linkable asset and I ask for a link and people say that, great content doesn't get you links, and I ask somebody for a link for this great piece of content I have and they give me that link, then somebody might go, well, that's crazy. I'll be like, well, no, it's not. It's just good content and somebody liked it and they linked to it. So, different people will have their own definition of what crazy is. And obviously, if we want to take a kind of universal definition of crazy, then, some of the experiences you've had in terms of what people have done to get backlinks has been, well, it was obviously much more crazy in that sense than what I'm doing. But, I think to sum it up, really, it's like you don't have to go for everything, and you just need to make sure that you understand your market and understand your competitors, because once you do that, then you'll at least have a better idea in terms of what your approach should be. And then you can audit the content on your site. You think, well, okay, we've got this linkable asset. That's great. Let's build links to it. Or if you don't, you got to think of other ways to be able to drive, get backlinks towards to your website. So that's what I think really it comes down to. It's all very situational. It's not, I'm not going to do the same exact thing for two different clients.
Nah, I think you're right. And I think, when I talk about, building tiered links and Web 2.0s and PBNs and 301 redirects and all that kind of stuff, you would only start to build that if, as you say, you need it. If you're for a local plumber, you might get away with some citations for your GMB and, a couple of local relevant links from other, construction people. That might be enough. You don't have to even touch any of this crazy stuff or come up with any crazy lies or any, any of that stuff. I think that's something that's really important to reiterate. If your back's against the wall and you're competing in the competitive markets in the world, I think in any walk of life, that's when the corruption or the cheating or the lies and deception start. And in a lot of cases, you don't have to resort to that level of tactic. And as I said at the start, try and do things the right way where you possibly can. Try and tick all of the right boxes and get your normal links and everything else before you start using any of the wacky stuff. Although the wacky stuff works, try not take a risk. Use it as the icing on top of the cake or whatever. I mean, as I say, if you're in the gambling niche, that they're just doing wacky stuff from the get-go, and you're just going to have to fight fire with fire in something like that niche. But it comes down to the competition. See what they're doing, replicate it, and maybe add a little bit of that icing on top of the cake if you need to take the top slots.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and a great probably place to end it there. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of SEO Tales. If you did, leave a like, rating below and subscribe, and we will see you in the next episode.
Cheers, guys.